So as the person gets the honor of going first in this series, my presentation is going to be very, very general, very big overview about the application process and how to pick grad schools and how to organize all the elements together and stuff. So it's a very big 10,000 foot overview. But first I can start by talking about my favorite subject, which is me. I'm originally from Naperville. I graduated UIUC in 2015, and I was the president of SWIP for my junior and senior year. I received the graduate research fellowship and went to the University of Washington in Seattle for my PhD. As an undergrad, I did theoretical condensed matter research, but in grad school, I transitioned to theoretical physical chemistry research, which meant my advisor was actually in the chemistry department, which is interesting. I left UW in March of last year with my master's after 4 years of my PhD program. And I'm currently a freelance science writer with a little list of places I've been published. So I'm still in Seattle, just freelancing from home. A quick disclaimer is that since I graduated 5 years ago, some of the specifics of this info might be outdated, and especially since 2020 is a exception year in many ways, you should always do your own research. Okay, so the general timeline is around now/October. It's generally a good time to go through graduate schools and make your list. And then once you make your list, you can ask your recommenders. So that's a benefit of making your list early, is that you can ask your recommenders early, give them a list of these are the schools I need you to send your recommendations to, etc. And then once you finalize that and you've asked your recommenders, you can work on your essays, your statement of purpose. Some schools have diversity statements, research statements for some fellowships, and pulling together test scores and transcripts is sometimes a bureaucratic nightmare. So give yourself some time to get U of I to send you the right version of your transcript. And then December through early January is generally when apps are due, but they can be, I think some priority admission deadlines are even in November, or they used to be. Again, do your own research. And then in late February to late March is when you get to fly out to visit grad schools and be wined and dined, which is a super fun time. And April 15th is sort of the universal deadline to pick which grad school you're going to go to after you've received all your acceptances. Okay, so 3 main concepts: where you're going to apply, what each school needs, which can be different, and when they need all those things by, which can be as early as December 1st for regular admission, as far as I remember. So to analyze these things, oops, blank. Okay. So the first thing before anything you have to decide is what's going to go in this top column or row. What are you going to look for in a graduate school? What's important to you? So these are some common ones and some that I considered when I was applying to grad school. You can get PhDs in fields that are not exactly physics, or some schools have applied physics programs separate from the regular physics programs, material science, chemistry, different types of engineering. So it's good to keep your options open. The size of a program can, just like when you're applying to undergrad, the size of a program can really influence your experience, as can the location. And then another thing to remember is that you'll be probably staying in your grad school location a few years longer than you stayed in your undergrad location. So location's pretty important in graduate school, a little bit more important than it was in undergrad. Not every program has a women in physics, equity and inclusion, student group. When I went to UW, there was not one there. We had to make our own. So that's something to consider. And then where applying to graduate school really stands out from applying to undergraduate is these two columns. So as you're looking for graduate schools, you should look at the schools, but you should also be searching through the faculty lists for people who have research interests that align with yours, or people with, science communication interests or science advocacy interests, stuff outside of research. And it's generally recommended that you find in a school that you're going to apply to, there's more than one person that you would be willing to work with. Because plans change very dramatically, very rapidly, and it's nice to have a plan B. And then the stipend. So this is sort of a it's fuzzy. So here, if you don't have to use this one, but if you just Google cost of living calculator, right? So let's say you're trying to compare going to grad school at U of I and going to grad school at like Columbia, like in New York City. New York. And then let's say, I don't know this at all off the top of my head, I'm making this number up. Let's say it's like 25,000 at U of I. Blah, blah, blah. Okay. So each calculator sort of uses different metrics, so you might get a different number every time, but this at least gives you an idea of, okay, if U of I is going to give me this much, how much is Columbia going to give me in comparison, based on the fact that you can get a one-bedroom apartment for like $900 in Urbana and nothing under $1,500 in New York City. So this even breaks it down by housing and tax and food, which I think is neat. But again, you can just Google cost of living calculator. There are 1,000 of them. But it's also, like I said, it's not perfect. Like, so if, for example, Columbia's stipend was 30,000, right? But they included different amenities, or it's just worth that extra $2,500 a year to you to live in New York City. There's trade-offs. So it's not just that, oh, Columbia is shortchanging me if they're only going to pay $30,000. It's a little more complicated than that. But this at least gives you a really good idea of what the cost of living looks like in different locations around the country and in different environs, rural, urban, college town, etc. There we go. So these might be a little outdated. I know UW took off their recommended GPA and GRE scores. I think a couple other schools did too. Some physics programs aren't requiring the physics GRE anymore. A lot of astronomy programs are not. And I think in 2020, like, I don't know what they're requiring. I think it's, again, do your own research, but yeah, so this might not apply so much anymore, but it might be good information to have just to sort of know where you are on that school's scale. And then similar to what you probably did in undergrad, you want a nice distribution of dream schools, target schools, and safety schools. So schools you are pretty sure you can get into, schools you can definitely get into, schools you can, probably get into, and schools that it would be really, 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 really nice if you could get into them. Okay, so question for you guys. This is, like I said, this row is going to be your first step. Step 0 is to figure out what you want to look for, what's important to you when you go to grad school. So does anyone have something that they'd have in their row that I don't have in mine? I don't know how to
Feel free to unmute yourselves or write it in the chat. You guys can just like blurt it out. You don't have to raise your hands.
Okay, average number of years to graduate, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a really good one. I think the general national super average is like 6, or at least as far as I remember. Anyone else?
Probably the research output as well.
The research output, yeah. How would you measure that, do you think?
It's a tricky concept, so maybe we should kind of, ideally you'd like to talk to the graduate students there. Maybe you could look at the publications and how much work is being put out, in what duration of time.
There's also the general grad school rankings that sort of correlate with that as well. National versus international, another good one.
I know for me, like, I want to get a master's degree. So for me, one of them would be like a thesis versus a non-thesis. Like if a school only does non-thesis masters versus a school who does both.
Yeah. Also a really good one in the chat, the ratio of research to coursework. That definitely changes from program to program. And also a lot of them will do qualifying exams differently. So some of them have qualifying exams right when you get there and it's just based off of undergraduate material. Some of them have it after your first or second year on graduate course material. At UW, it was just the final exams of certain graduate courses. So yeah, coursework and how they work out the qualifications for master's degrees and the qualifications for your qualifying exam are also important and can change dramatically. Okay, that was very helpful, thanks. There's also, if it's important to you to be close to your family or in a certain region of the United States, there's also, some people have two-body problems, like I did, where you have to sort of coordinate with your partner where you guys are gonna go. So this is one way of doing it, but it's kind of qualitative and we're physicists, so let's quantitativize it a little bit. Yeah. We can add numbers, values for all this. So if I wanted to put a higher priority on degree programs that would give me a physics PhD, I can make that 1, and then in order of preference, rank them 2 and 3, and do it all the way across. Say I really wanted a big program, I wanted a women in physics group, I wanted more than 3 advisors, etc. So then you can just go and make a sum column, right? Add it all together. And then we can rank all of these or sort them by column, column H. There we go. So it looks like F has the lowest score, followed closely by A. But you'll notice that I kept this non-quantified, not as numbers, and that's because I don't want just all of my top schools to be my dream schools. I want a nice distribution of dream schools, target schools, and safety schools. So once I rank them this way, numerically, then I can look and see, okay, do I have, well, this is dream, target, safety. Maybe I want to switch out these two, have another target, which has the same score as the dream, whatever. The important part is that this, you don't count this as a score, because it's going to have more of a Gaussian when you're done. Okay, so next we're going to move on to actually applying. Does anyone have any questions about choosing which grad schools to apply to?
I have a question. How many do most people like apply to?
Good question. It really varies. Some people know where they want to go, especially if you did like a research internship at another university and you just want to go there and work with that professor. But Budgetary limitations are also a concern. Applications are expensive. It can be anywhere between $50 to $150 each. So that adds up pretty quickly. I know personally I applied to 11. And I think that was like approximately what my peers did. I think generally between like 6 and then somebody did 15, which I feel like is excessive. But I'm generally on that order. But it's totally up to you. If you know that these are your schools, these 3, and you have a good chance of getting into all of them, then just apply to those 3.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay. So now, there are a lot of moving parts to grad school applications. And again, this is going to seem pretty familiar if you apply to a lot of undergraduate schools. But there are a few things I want to point out that are really useful. The first is, once you choose your list, save all of the admissions pages, right? So now if I just forget something about this application, the link is right there, and it's very, very easy for me to get to. I recommend ordering them by due date, because that just makes your prioritizing easier. Transcripts are a pain in the butt. Some schools want you to scan a physical official copy. Some want U of I to send them electronically an official copy. Some don't mind an unofficial copy PDF. And some want you to get a physical official copy and then physically mail it to them. So that's one of the administrative nightmares I mentioned. GRE scores are a little easier that way. I think you just plug and chug. You just have to keep track of which ones you've sent already and which ones you haven't. Keeping track of the cost of the app, also important. So I actually have not added this together before. Yeah, applications can add up really quickly. So keep that in mind. There are schools, and usually they'll say this somewhere on their admission page, that you can apply for financial hardship and they'll waive the application fee. So if you're interested, look into that. Let's see. Statement of purpose. I don't know, so this was sort of the distribution of how many schools wanted diversity statements in 2015. They were relatively new then, and I don't know if that's sort of expanded at all. But that's something to look out for as well. Sometimes they're optional, like they just give you the option to upload one if you want. Let's see. And then, so these 2 columns, this one I would color in purple if the school had requested recommendations from my recommenders. So the way recommendations work is you, in the application, just put in your recommenders' emails and then just click like send, and your recommenders receive an email from the school that says like, hey, upload your recommendation at this link. So I would color this block in when I clicked send on the application, and then I'd fill in their initials whenever I got the confirmation that they had uploaded their recommendation. And then also some applications give you like weird usernames, passwords, codes, whatever. This spreadsheet is a nice way to just paste them and keep them somewhere. Yeah, so that's useful. Okay, any questions about the application process? Sort of all the elements and keeping them organized.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is the diversity means whether the school says they are diverse, like they have a announcement about diversity, or it asks us to write a letter about diversity?
Yeah, so this particular column, I know I didn't specify, but it was talking about diversity statements. So whether or not a school required you to write an essay on subjects of diversity and equity or not.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
So then like the Y means that this school did require it, but since it's white, that meant like I hadn't gotten to it yet.
Mhm.
I sort of messed with this to pretend like I was halfway through my applications. Other questions?
Also, this might be a bit, do you think there are a lot of schools that ask you for a personal statement along with the statement of purpose? Or is it just one or the other?
I think there's, as far as I know, and this is 5 years old knowledge, they're the same thing.
Okay.
They might be they might use different names for them, right? But they're essentially the same piece of the application.
When I opened up my applications, Bashi, all of mine are or have been personal statement, but
Okay.
Celia Elliott will be talking about this too in a later lecture in the series, so you can ask her that question.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys.
Also, this isn't listed here, but also some applications will require or will ask for a CV. So that's another element to keep in mind.
And what's the difference between a CV and a resume?
Oh, I wish I knew. I know-ish in just that they have different templates. You're allowed a little bit more artistic license with a resume. So, you can do a little bit more design in terms of structure, whereas CVs, I think, are typically just black and white lists, just not even columns. You can have a table with courses and stuff, but unlike a resume where you can have like different columns and you can write like about your hobbies, I don't know, languages, CVs are a little more formal in that you write specifically like what you did. And on a resume, you wouldn't necessarily say that you presented at a conference. CVs are particularly academic that way. So if you presented a poster at a conference or a talk at a conference, or helped organize one or attended one, got a paper at any of your publications, if you get published, those all go in a CV. So a CV is basically just a more boring, super academia focused resume. I hope that helps, although that would be another great question for Celia. Okay. So this spreadsheet is free to view the copy if you want it. So I'll paste the link in the chat. But next, we'll talk real quick. So now you've got your list, right? You've got your list of schools you're applying to, and you have all the deadlines for the applications. So once you have that all together, to make it easy for your recommenders, the best thing to do is to send them that list. And then I specified that they all accept electronic letters and they'll receive an email from the school, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing that's sometimes helpful to do is to send your recommenders your CV or your personal statements, research statements, just because some of them find it helpful to talk about things that you may have done that they don't know about, to sort of bulk up their recommendation letter. So that can be really helpful. Okay, and I know it might feel obvious, but I feel like it was worth saying, which is that your worth is not measured by numbers. But not only that, it's not measured by your research experience or how well you write or how well you do physics or math or how many schools accept or reject you. You have inherent worth, and that has nothing to do with academics.
I have a quick question about the previous slide.
Sure, yeah.
By when do you think is a good deadline for yourself to kind of finish your CV/statement of purpose and send it to your recommenders, so they have enough time to work on their recommendation letter?
Yeah, good question. So I know for me, it sort of was easy because I was also applying to the Graduate Research Fellowship, which had a deadline in mid-October. So at that point, I had my personal statement for the fellowship that I could send them. And I had a CV because I had applied to, if you've ever applied to, in your undergraduate, if you've applied to like internships or REUs, you know, those can just, you can just tweak them a little bit to add more recent info and then send them off. They don't have to be, the ones you send to your advisor or recommenders do not have to be like clean or anything. It's mostly just for their information so they can make their recommendation letters as strong as possible. So it's, I would say mid to late October-ish.
At least like a 1 month
yeah.
time period. Okay.
Yeah, and it also, some, as all of us know, some professors are better at deadlines than others. So, you know, some of them need the extra time.
Okay, just make sure they have plenty of time.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And then my last slide is just a question slide. So any questions on anything we discussed?
So when you're considering your safety dream / target schools, I know it's a kind of a tricky concept, but how are you determining, you know, if it would be a target or a safety or a dream school?
Yeah, good question. I think so some schools have taken off their like recommended GPA, GRE scores for diversity and inclusion purposes, which is great, but also makes it kind of harder to judge whether a school is a target school or a dream school. Yeah, it is fuzzy. Some hints are to look at the rankings, like I mentioned before. Anything in like the top 10 is going to be a dream school for pretty much everybody, you know. Next, you could also, there are a lot of forums, grad school forums, where, you know, everybody's talking about where they're applying and what their stats are. And then after they all get in, people will post like, here's where I got in, here's my GPA, here's my GRE scores, etc. So there are sort of crowdsourced places where you can find that information. But of course, it's all anecdotal. There's no real official way to get sort of that kind of feeling.
Knowledge about it. Okay, okay, thank you.
I'll also put my contact info up here and a picture of my dog.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for coming in, speaking to us today.
Yeah.
If you could send me the link to the Excel sheet, I can send it to SWIP.
Yeah,
And
just paste that in the chat right now.
okay, awesome. Thank you.
Stop.
And then also for next week, it'll be at 5:30 on Thursday. So I just make note of that time change for that week. And it'll be with Jacqueline Schmidt, and she will be talking about how to decide on a degree. So like a physics degree versus engineering degree, or like a PhD versus a master's.
Yeah, and the Google Doc will connect, like my Gmail is on the Google Doc. So if you think of any questions afterwards, after we hang up, feel free to email me.